My friend, what if I told you that something has been unearthed, something ancient, something hidden for thousands of years, yet pulsing with a message for us today? The question before us is staggering. Asterisk, have the first words of Moses been discovered? Asterisk, on August 27, a date that now stands marked, whispers emerge of fragments, inscriptions, echoes from the dawn of God's covenant with his people. Imagine the man who stood on Sinai, the prophet through whom the Torah was given, the shepherd who led Israel out of Egypt. His very words, etched long before kingdoms rose and fell, now brought to light. If this is true, then God is reminding us of beginnings, of foundations, of his covenant that never fades. The first words of Moses would not simply be history, they would be prophecy. For the same, God who spoke then is speaking now, calling his people back to the foundation of his word. The possibility of discovering the first words of Moses is nothing short of monumental. These words would represent the very foundation upon which God began to reveal his covenant, his law, and his plan for his people. They are not just the writings of a man, but the breath of God captured in human language, words that carried Israel out of slavery and into destiny. If fragments of these ancient beginnings have surfaced, it is a reminder that the roots of our faith are not myth or legend, but history anchored in stone and ink. The first words of Moses are the doorway to the story of redemption, the place where God's promises took written form. To uncover them in our time would be like hearing the trumpet of Sinai, once again, calling us back to the bedrock of faith and the unshakable truth of God's word. If indeed the first words of Moses have surfaced, then it is no accident. They come as a sign to our generation. God's covenant is not a relic buried in the sands of history. It is a living reality that continues to echo across time. The revelation given to Moses was not meant for Israel alone, but for all who would hear and obey. These words, now resurfacing, testify that the covenant of God has not been broken, forgotten, or silenced. Just as Israel was called to remember the Lord who brought them out of Egypt, so too are we being called to remember the God who delivers, redeems, and restores. This discovery would remind us that the same covenant, keeping God of Sinai, is still present, still faithful, and still speaking. His word remains unshaken, a lamp to our feet, and a warning sign to our generation. The resurfacing of Moses' first words would be more than a historical marvel. It would be a divine call to return to the ancient foundations that cannot be shaken. We live in a world where truth is redefined daily, where foundations are eroded, and where people chase after fleeting voices. But God is reminding us that his foundation has never changed. The first words of Moses marked the starting point of covenant, holiness, and divine order. To rediscover them in our time is to be summoned back to that same foundation, to realign our lives with the eternal truth written from the beginning. Just as Israel was instructed not to turn to the right or left from the law, so too must we anchor ourselves in the Word. The foundations set by God through Moses remain the plumb line, the measure by which every generation must be weighed and guided. What was spoken thousands of years ago was not only meant for that ancient generation, it was spoken for us as well. The first words of Moses, if now revealed, remind us that God's word is both historical and prophetic. It carries within it truths that transcend time, truths that are alive for every age. What began at Sinai did not end there. It was a prophetic declaration of God's covenantal love, his justice, and his call to holiness. These words, resurfacing now, may serve as a warning to the nations and a wake-up call to the church. just as prophecy often points to both present and future realities. The words of Moses continue to unveil God's heart and his unfolding plan. History becomes prophecy when God's word enters our moment, reminding us that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that his purposes never fail. If the first words of Moses are indeed discovered, then it is not only a message for historians or scholars, it is a trumpet blast to this generation. God is showing us that his word cannot be buried, silenced, or forgotten. In a time when many have turned away, when faith is mocked, and when truth is trampled, the Lord is raising his voice once again through what was spoken in the beginning. This is more than a relic. It is a sign that God's covenant is alive, his promises are sure, and his warnings remain urgent. The words of Moses would shine as a beacon in the darkness, pointing us back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who calls us to return before it is too late. To hear them today is to realize that the Lord of Sinai is still speaking, still shaking nations. Moses was not just a leader of Israel. He was the vessel through whom God's eternal word was delivered to mankind. His voice echoed on Mount Sinai, but the words he spoke were not his own. They were the voice of the Almighty clothed in human tongue. To even consider that his first words may have been discovered is to recognize the weight of divine revelation breaking into history once more. Moses stood as mediator between God and his people, carrying commandments that would shape nations and civilizations for millennia. His words established the covenant, defined holiness, and revealed the heart of God. If such a discovery has been made, it does not simply connect us to an ancient past. It reminds us that God chose a man to be his mouthpiece, and through him he continues to speak. The messenger may have passed, but the message remains alive.